We could do that too. That would work. So anyway, while the sound guy's coming, I suppose we could start with the introduction. So welcome to day 2 of the project conference. Hope you enjoyed the keynote. I thought it was really good. Because we both do blogs, sometimes people get me confused with Christoph, so that's why he agreed to grow a mustache, so that you can now tell us apart.
I don't have a mustache, so hopefully I look different from Brian here. I came in here at the last second. I was just taking a bio break there, and it kind of reminded me of a few years back we had a conference in Spain, in Madrid, and as always when I go to Europe, I always have a hard time sleeping because, of course, I want to be sleeping at the wrong time of the day and stuff like that, and so I wasn't sleeping well at night, and so the last day I had a session to speak at 8:30 in the morning. So I thought, well, no problem, because I'll be awake all night long anyway. There's no way that I'll miss the session. Well, I woke up and it was 8:20, and luckily it was just downstairs from the hotel, and so I quickly showered. I did a 5-minute shower and all that kind of stuff and got down there right at the very last second, and hopefully I looked refreshed to everyone there, but boy, that was cutting it close. Okay, so let's go ahead and just start with all the introductions and stuff like that. My name is Adrian Jenkins. I'm a senior escalation engineer. I work on the support side of things. I've worked through the years a lot with the support organization, and I've even worked with the product group as a program manager. A couple of years ago I moved to the support side because actually I like digging into problems and trying to fix them. So that's kind of fun for me. May sound kind of weird to you, but that's what I like doing. Brian, go ahead.
My name is Brian Smith. I'm a senior support escalation engineer working on the same team as Adrian. I've been with the team for about 7 or 8 years now, and with Microsoft just a couple of years longer than that. But worked with Project Server even before that, so back to the sort of 2002, 2003, and even Project Central days, I guess. But so today we're going to be doing part 2 of this session.
The sequel.
The sequel, yeah. In 3D. I promised yesterday we would be in 3D, and you can see we are. Today's going to be slightly different in that Adrian's going to be doing most of the talking, and I'm going to be doing most of the heckling. So over to you, Adrian.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is kind of interesting how Brian, he did his slides, and we did this independently of each other. We just saw this slide, and I'm a smart aleck at heart. And so I looked at this and it's like, well, how can I use this slide? And so I put some pithy little things here. 97% of this presentation should be useful to you. Life is good, enjoy it. These people on the right-hand side here, they're just having way too much fun. Now, hopefully you're having fun too, but I don't know. I've just never been in a situation like that where I had that much fun playing a video game. I'm just not a video gamer, I guess. Then the people down on the left-hand corner, looks like they have lots of coffee, but they're not using it. Maybe they're all awake. I don't know. Okay, so how many of you were in the session yesterday? Okay. Ooh, now we have sound. Okay, can you still hear me in the back? Okay, good. That'll be easier than trying to hold this thing.
Particularly when you're typing.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so the good thing about these sessions is that you didn't have to attend yesterday's session to get benefit from today's session. This is not like going from Chemistry 101 to Chemistry 302 or something like that. I mean, they don't build on each other. There are some pieces that you'll see that I'm going to do that look similar to what Brian did. In fact, I'm going to go through a quick review here. So here's kind of our agenda. We're going to do a quick review of what we did in part 1. Just some of the really high-level things. I'm going to talk about times when you might have to go directly into the database, and I'll put lots of warnings around that. I'm going to talk to you and show you a demonstration of how I used Fiddler. It's a tool that's available to help solve a problem, or at least figure out what the root of the problem was. I'm going to demonstrate using Process Explorer, and then I'll talk a little bit about the queue. And then I'll talk about my favorite tools of the trade. Brian had his list, I have my list, and they're not always the same. In the support organization, we tend to kind of specialize in some ways. And although we're kind of the jacks of all trade and we can go around and do different things on different parts of the product, we tend to focus on some areas where we're more comfortable than in other places. Like Brian, he loves doing workflow stuff, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Love it.
Yeah, he loves it. I love I love debugging on the client and on the server and stuff like that. Some other people, they love just doing the Exchange integration and those pieces and stuff like that. So I have some tools that are a little bit different from what Brian uses all the time. So, and then toward the end, we'll just open it up for some questions. So here's our quick review. As Brian noted yesterday, it's best that you be able to narrow down the problem as much as you can. It's amazing the times when I get email messages from people or whatever and they say, it doesn't work. Well, then I have to say, well, what is it? Well, is it project client? Is it the server? What is it? And then we kind of keep on going through that iterative process until we finally get down to, oh, okay, well, when I open a project from Project Server, I see a message, and then after that, these particular things happen. Okay? So make sure you have as much detail about the problem as possible. It's not enough just to say, well, I think it's maybe someplace on the server or something like that. Get as much detail as possible. I like the quote here where nothing has changed. Sometimes we'll get that type of report back from a customer saying, well, this was working until yesterday. Well, what changed? Well, nothing other than blah, blah, blah. And they'll go through a whole list of things that changed, but that has nothing to do with the problem, they'll say. And it's like, okay, it may not have anything to do with the problem, but some of those things might have something to do with the problem. So what you do is you mentally tuck that information away in your mind so that you can then start going through the process of filtering out the things that probably truly are not applicable, and then going into the things that probably may have something to do with the problem. Okay? The little dark green thing on the bottom, is this specific to one machine, specific to a user, specific to what? Just get all the information that you can get. When does it happen? Brian talked about this. Is this the sort of thing where it always happens immediately, or does it happen after a certain amount of time? Those sorts of things, because that can help you narrow in on the problem to know whether or not maybe it's a database timeout problem, or if it's just right there on the page when you're loading something in PWA and it just happens to stop immediately. Okay, reproducing the error. This is very, very important. We talked about this yesterday as well. This picture here just shows you that there are several different ways that you can enter resources onto a task within project. Why is that important? Well, because each one of these things has some slightly different behaviors, and it goes through some slightly different code to give you the same end result, which is I now have somebody assigned to a task. But because they go through different pieces of code, you could get some different results. So if your repro is, well, just put a person on the task, that may show the problem immediately, or maybe not. It may be that you have to go to the Assign Resources dialog box there on the right-hand side to actually get to the repro. As I shared with you yesterday, there was a time when I was beta testing or helping to test project version 3.0. So this would have been probably back in 1991, somewhere along that line. And I was doing some things and project crashed. And so I reported the bug to the development team, and they reported back, nope, it's not happening for us, it must be you. And it's like, well, it's not me, I can prove it, it's crashing here. So we went back and forth for a little bit, and eventually the developer, he says, okay, I'm just going to come to your office. Now at that time, my office was probably about, 6 or 5-6 miles away from where he was. So he drove his car to my office, and he came and said, okay, show me the problem. So I showed him the problem. And I'm actually a keyboard guy most of the time, but in this case, I actually was using the mouse to do part of the repro. And he says, oh, there's your problem right there. He says, well, when you click on that button, it's doing blah, 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 and he explained the whole thing, and then that causes the crash. He says, well, when I was doing the repro, I was doing it all with the keyboard, and therefore the mouse never came into play, and therefore the problem never occurred. So it's important sometimes to get to that fine detail to say, I clicked on the menu with my mouse versus I just selected that menu with a keyboard. Okay? So I just bring you this example to show you that sometimes the details in how you reproduce the problem are so important to really getting to the root of the problem.
Yeah, I had one just the other day where I was working with a customer that was seeing a problem, and they gave me the steps in reasonable detail, but I couldn't reproduce it. And eventually they sort of put together a sort of short video clip of what they were doing. And as soon as I saw the video, I could see that they were using a date format within projects that didn't have a time element to it. So it was just the 1st of March or whatever. I had 1st of March, 8 a.m. And that small difference made a difference in the repro of the problem. So it can be very precise when we're trying to sort of help you identify what's causing the issue. I mean, the great one with that is they could immediately get a workaround of, well, if you have the time there as well, it doesn't happen. We're still going to fix the bug, but for now, get your PMs to have the time in their element, then when they do that particular thing, nothing bad's going to happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of what we're showing you here doesn't mean that you're going to be able to go out and necessarily correct the problem. It will help you to identify where it lies so that you can maybe work around it, you can avoid it, you can do all those sorts of things until some sort of fix may come down the line or whatever the case may be. So these techniques are things that we use even with the customers that we help every day to at least avoid the problems until a fix comes down the pipe or whatever. Okay, so where to look when things go wrong. We went through this one. I don't have the pretty new slide or picture at the bottom of where Brian's blog is. I didn't know he changed his picture yesterday.
No, I didn't. My blog now doesn't look like that. The hummingbirds went. I was fed up with the hummingbirds. So
yeah,
different picture, but same URL.
So anyway, here are some locations where you would look for detailed information about what might have happened. Of course, ULS logs if you're on the server, very, very important. Sometimes they have lots of obscure stuff in there, stuff that even I go, I don't know what this is. But sometimes that information can be very helpful for me, for example, because it gives you kind of really, really rough call stack of what process was happening, and it sort of goes through and can help you to understand, well, okay, if I'm going to look in the code, which you don't have, but if I'm going to look in the code, where would I start looking and maybe setting breakpoints and so forth. Sometimes the ULS logs come out and they really do tell you the answer. Right there in black and white, they say, this is your problem, and if you correct the problem, you're good to go. PSS diagnostics, when you run the configuration wizard, there's an upgrade log when you upgrade from, let's say, a service pack or something like that, or a previous version to the next version. Of application events, I'm going to put a plug in here. We did this yesterday as well. You may be working in project, for example, and it may crash. Those things happen sometimes. Okay? But are you one of those people who says, I don't want to send that stuff to Microsoft, it's a waste of time? Or do your customers do that? Do people in your company do that? Do they just say, I'm not going to do that because no one cares? Personally, I care. As I explained yesterday, a lot of that information is like being able to vote on an issue here. The more votes we get, the more nasty we know the problem is, and we know that it's affecting more and more people. Also, it helps me when I'm trying to debug problems to figure out what is going on. So send that crash information to us if you can. Sometimes in the temp folder there's some things, and then of course there are a bunch of places you can go online to look at details. Okay, so that's the quick overview of yesterday. I didn't go through all the demos and stuff like that. You'll have to watch the show, get it on DVD, coming out in about 2 weeks. No, I don't know when it comes out, but or maybe it comes on Netflix, I don't know. Okay. So database fixes. This is a tricky thing here because we tell you don't go into the database and mess around. Okay? Why do we tell you that? Are we just trying to hide something? Not necessarily. I mean, you can go in there and you can look, and it's not like we're really trying to hide anything. You can figure out what the schema is. You can do all those sorts of things. In fact, in project prior to Project 2003, we had it all documented, and we said, go in there and you can change stuff, and when you open it back up into Project, it'll all look good, it'll schedule right. We told you how to do all of that. But starting with 2007, we kind of wanted to move away from there because we now had a more rich environment for developing and so forth, the PSI. And so it wasn't really as much of, hey, go in there and start splatting tasks into the schema so that you can create a project. It was more of, hey, why don't you do this through the API that we have given you so that you can get the same thing done. We're going to blow up in a second. So we've documented the reporting database because we want you to go there, make cool reports, and if you want to extend it there and put your stuff in there, that's okay. But we've just kind of moved away from having you directly modify the database. But, and you know, there's always that, well, what about this particular case? There are cases where you might have to do a little bit of exploration in there, and I'm going to give you, in big bold letters, you'll see them later, it's like you got to be careful when you do this. Don't just be doing this because you're going to be a hero or something like that. You got to have a great reason. And if you're talking to us on the phone or something like that, we may guide you through something like that, and that would be okay. So when is it okay to modify? Well, let me present to you a scenario. Okay, I'm going to call this one the configuration error. All right. And here's where I get to switch to this machine over here, and I'm going to load up Internet Explorer. I'll do that here. Okay. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my server. I should be seeing the home page right now. This is one of the servers I have in my office, and I should be seeing the home page. Okay? Well, that doesn't look very nice, but if you look at that message, it's actually fairly good, actually. It says an error occurred while trying to add item. What was it trying to add? It was trying to add layout something to TS Summary ASPX to the Quick Launch. Okay? Quick Launch, does that ring a bell to anyone? Okay, the stuff that's usually on the side pane, stuff like that, that's your Quick Launch. The error returned was cannot use a leading ... to exit above the top directory. Well, if you look at the URL there, it has ... leading up to it. So this is actually fairly good. It gives me the usual correlation ID. You know what you would do with that correlation ID? ULS log, exactly. So you'd copy that, you'd go to the ULS log for the time when this error occurred, and it tells you exactly when it occurred, so you could find the right ULS log on the right date at about the right time, and then you could search in the ULS log to get that information. Okay? So let me switch back here to this. Okay? So what do we have here? Well, we have the error, of course, and then at the bottom, I've listed out the ULS. I'm not going to dig through the ULS log to show you exactly what was going on at that time, but these are the two pertinent things I got out of there. It says SharePoint Foundation logging correlation data, some medium something, and you can see that it was a get to IIS, and it was to default.aspx, so that's my home page. Then the next thing down below just says logging correlation. Is that very useful? No, doesn't really tell me much at all. Actually, the error message is probably your winner in this case. Sometimes the error message on top would be the loser, and the biggest winner would be at the bottom. Okay? Sometimes it might be neither of those, and so that's when you might have to do a little bit more digging. Okay? So keep this in mind here, right here, because we're going to come back to this example in a second. Okay, let me give you another scenario. Let's suppose a user reports to you, hey, when I go to page whatever it is in PWA, it doesn't display for me. You go, it's working for me. You ever had that problem? Yeah. Okay. And then you find out, you go to your coworker and you say, hey, Brian, does this page work for you? Yeah, it works for me too. Yeah, it must be Bob. You know, he's always messing things up. Okay? It's just Bob. So the scenario is that you go to this page and it seems to be working for a lot of people but not for others. Why would that be? Okay? Well, just to give you a little bit of background here, when a user goes to a page in PWA, there's a lot of information that is persisted about that user's usage of that page. So even though the project manager or the administrator in this case may have actually set up the page to show maybe the project center where the first column is ID, maybe name, duration, start, finish, or something like that, I can go into that page myself and I can move columns around and I can hide things and I can do some customization of my own. I can even move the splitter bar so I can see more or less of the page. All of that information is stored in the database for each user, for each of the views they go to. Great thing is, of course, if I go to another machine, different browser, or whatever the case may be, I get to see the same thing. So that's another case where information is stored in the database, but it may get messed up from time to time. Why is that? We don't know all the time. But this would help you to at least identify and maybe perhaps get them working in the meantime. So where's configuration data stored? Here are some typical things that you might have to look at some point. So there's the MSP sitemap, and that's the part there that I showed you where I couldn't get the page to load because the side pane or the quick launch was no longer there. There's also the gotta slow down. There's the MSP web admin table. This has a lot of the overall settings for the server itself. Okay, I've seen cases where maybe the default locale is not quite right or whatever, and so something doesn't quite work right, and so sometimes you might have to reset something in that table. The more common example is that for people who have tons and tons of users in their system, you heard in the keynote where somebody had, I don't know, was it 40,000 users, 24, big numbers of users, okay? And for cases like that, if you're using Active Directory synchronization, it could take a very, very long time for all of that to finish simply because there's a lot of work to do. Well, we have settings that you can put within this table here in the web admin table that say, okay, I'm not going to have you synchronize to the root site, or I'm not going to have you synchronize the subsites for each of the projects that are created. So there are specific cases where you might have to go into a table like this. Typically, we would have information in TechNet, or maybe a knowledge base article or another place where we'd tell you specifically, here's the field that you need to look at within the table that you need to set to a different value or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because in that particular case where we can change those values, and there's a great TechNet white paper out there, we also talk about the PSI methods to be able to set that same parameter. The tricky thing is it easier to write an application to use the PSI to go in and change one value in a database table, or is it easier to use SQL Management Studio to go in and change one record?
Yeah.
I know which one I'd choose. We probably prefer you to use the former, but we understand that you might want to use the latter. So that's one of those occasions where we know people will probably do it, so we're probably better off helping them do it properly rather than trying to stop them doing it.
Exactly. But if you do write the application, think of all the experience you get.
Yeah,
okay.
That's true.
So there are advantages. Okay, so the last thing I have here is the user data, which is the MSP Web User Properties table. This is where all of the information for a given user, for the views that they've gone to in PWA, is stored. Okay, and I'll show you an example of that here in just a second. I kind of did a dump of what was on my server, and just to show you kind of the variety of information that's there, and maybe show you some techniques for why, or for how you might even identify which view, which user, and stuff like that, because you might have to go in there and delete the data. Okay, and in that particular case, it would be no different than the user had never been there. Of course, they would lose their settings that they had on that particular view, but that might be a better option than them not being able to go to the view in total. Okay, so I'm going to fix the configuration error, so I'm going to go back and do a demo here. And let me just get the right server. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is my SQL Server here. Down at the bottom, I've actually done a query, and that's actually some stuff from the user properties. I'll show that to you in a second here as well. But let me just go ahead and let me do a select from sitemap. Okay, so I'll highlight that, and we'll execute the query. Okay, there's my sitemap information. So you can see this looks very similar to what you have in PWA. You can see that, well, here's a link that goes to notifications, whatever the case may be. So going down through this list here, I'm just going to look for something that looks similar to the error that I saw where, remember, I had the URL with the ... in front of it. Let me see if I can find it. Well, look at that. Does that look familiar? Okay. Has ... layouts. Okay, so in this particular case, I had called it more timesheet stuff. Not very interesting. This is the important thing. What I need here is I need to have this SM UID, the sitemap UID, so I'm going to copy that. And in this case here, there's absolutely no way that I can go into PWA and fix the problem, because what's going to happen? No matter which page I go to, it's always going to try to display what? The quick launch. So I'm in a lose-lose situation here. There's no way that I could fix this through PWA. So this is one of those rare cases where you might have to go in here, find the bad piece of data, and then fix it. Okay. Now I might be able to come in here and just correct the custom URL and make it a good URL. In this case, I'm just going to delete it because it was just garbage that I created for this demo. Okay, so I've already copied that. So let me just come down here, and I'm going to do a delete MSP sitemap where SM UID equals did I need from? Yeah, I'm in the table. So, and here I gave it the qualifier that I want. I could have deleted everything from there, and that would have been really, really bad. So, can you see how dangerous this could be? Had I not gotten the right qualifier in there, I would have really messed myself up. Is this a reason why you shouldn't be messing around in the database? Okay, you got to know what you're doing here. And we always tell you, if you're going to play around, do it on something where you don't care a whole lot. You know, you can set up your own site and mess around all you want, but if you're going to do this on a production site, you got to really know what you're going to do here. So try it on your dev environment first, whatever the case may be. But this is to demonstrate, too, that there are cases when you just have to do this. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Internet Explorer here, and I should have demonstrated this, too. You know, there's this link down here that says go back to site. No matter what I did here, it never would have worked. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. And here you can see I fixed the problem. Okay? That's just to show you that there are cases where you definitely have to go into the database to fix things. We don't highly recommend it, and there are reasons for that, but there are those occasions. Okay. I've now fixed the configuration error. Well, let me just summarize. Before I go into Fiddler, I'll just summarize a little bit more here. You have to... Well, wait a minute. I've already summarized. No. You have to... I just want to emphasize again, be very careful when you do things directly in the database. Sometimes you go in there and you might be able to at least read the data and figure out what the problem is. Or you may be able to use some of the other techniques like the SQL profiler and things like that to actually figure out what it is that is the problem on the system. In this case here, I was able to do the select statement from the sitemap table, and I was able to find the row that was bad. Now, did I have to delete it? Well, I may have been able to actually correct that URL that was on that record and so forth. So there may be things that you can do that don't require you to delete data. You might be able to fix up the data. Look at your options that you have available for you and then choose the best one. Okay, so Fiddler. Who has used the tool called Fiddler? Okay, that's pretty impressive. Okay, what do you think of it? You like it? Kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so what is it? It's a tool that allows you to monitor HTTP or HTTPS traffic between your computer and the internet. Now, the internet may be your intranet. It's just all of that traffic over HTTP. Okay, so what might you be interested in seeing? Well, let's suppose you're in PWA and you're loading up a page and maybe not loading the way you expect. You could look at the traffic to see, well, what's some of the stuff that's going back and forth to the server, okay? What you would typically see would be maybe a SOAP call or a PSI call being made to the server, and then you'd see the return results. Sometimes you can actually see some data there that even makes sense. Other times it's just kind of this blobby type stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So how do you use this? How do you use Fiddler? I'm going to show you a scenario here, and let me just kind of introduce it. So let's suppose that you have a project. People have been working on it. It's all good. Life is great. Okay. Now, someone calls you up and says, I can't open up the project. You're thinking to yourself, ooh, that's not good. You try a number of different things, and it just doesn't seem to work. Some of the symptoms that you see, in fact, are that they say, well, I load the project, and then I see nothing. Well, you say, well, let's define that a little bit more, because remember, you're trying to get the fine details to help you to understand what's going on here. And they say, okay, well, when I load the project, I see the progress indicator indicating that it seems to be loading something, and then it just sort of magically stops, and then I'm left staring at project 1. Okay? So it just doesn't do anything. All right? Some other users may report that they see an error. Okay, that's good information here. So in this particular case, it says, well, there's a SOAP reader failure. Well, that's good information too. For your information, we use SOAP to create the messages that are then sent back and forth to the server. And within those messages, we have the PSI calls, which are carried out on the server. And then there's the return result. And then we take the information from the server. And if, in the case of opening up a project, we actually take all of that data that's sent back. We reconstruct it or compile it together. And then we put it into your cache. And then your project opens from the cache. So there's a lot of things that happen there. But if something goes wrong along the way, of course, then you can't open up your project. Okay, so let me just give you a demonstration using Fiddler. Let me switch to the right box here. Looks like I need to. Okay, now I can switch. I was going to do this demonstration live from my laptop here, but there's a lot of latency between here and Redmond where my server is. My office was also moved on the Friday right before I left, and so all of my machines were taken down and stuff like that. And Monday morning, some of them were running, so I had someone go to my office and get my SQL Server running, because that's very important. But one of my other boxes that I could have used for the demonstration, it's not running. And so I'm going to use this other box, but I'm going to switch back and forth a little bit, but you'll just have to trust me, okay, on this. Had I been able to do the full thing, you would have seen that, yes, he is telling the truth here, but please believe me that I'm telling you the truth. Okay, so here I have project open, and I'm going to go ahead and open up a project called onetask.mpp. Okay, I want you to look at this project here, and I'm going to go to the resource sheet. I'm going to go to, let's say, the usage view. I'll even go to the organizer here, and you can see that all it has are some views here. I have no reports, no modules, just the default tables, default filters, standard calendar, which happens to be very standard, no maps, no fields. Oh, actually, I do have fields because I'm connected to my server. These are enterprise fields, but they don't actually belong in this MPP file here. Okay, so I could have connected offline. Okay, and no group. So really, I have one task in this project. Okay, now let me show you what I did, I came into this project here, and let me go back to the Gantt chart here. And I said, I'm going to be the project manager here. I really like task because, boy, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so I went in here and, oh, I know what that is. Hold on a second. Don't you hate it when demos don't work the way you want? Okay. So I just came in here and I just started pasting some tasks, and I got up to, I don't know, it was probably 10 or 11 or 12 or something like that. I probably didn't stop at 13 because that would be bad luck. Okay. So then after that, I saved the project to the server. And then, let me go ahead and open up the project from the server that I had saved. Okay. Actually, I did end on 13. Lucky 13. Okay. And so here you can see that the project opened. Now, I'm going to talk about the cache a little bit later in this session here, but we have people who, just as a matter of course, they clear out their cache every time they start project and stuff like that. Now, there are some times when you might have to clear out the cache, and I'll give you some of those details later, but in this particular case here, this project, even though it looks very simple, is actually very, very complex. And had I not had it in the cache, we'd still be waiting for this thing to open. So the cache can be your friend because it gives you the ability to open up things quickly. It allows you to save things quickly. And by the way, everything always goes through the cache. You can't bypass the cache and say, well, I deleted it, therefore I don't have the cache. Well, it's going to fill up the cache with more stuff. You always have to go through it. Okay, so at this point, had I done the real demonstration here, I would have come in and I would have said, all right, I'm going to close this, and I'll keep it checked out because I don't need to go through the check-in process. I can close the one task MPP project. And then I would come in here into Tools Options, Save, and then clean up my cache. And here it's still checked out to me, so I came in here, and then I would have deleted this project. Okay? Now, would that have been okay? Maybe. But here's where the problem was coming. Let me show you what normally happens during the open process. And I'll open up this can't open it project just to show you the normal process of opening. Okay? So I'm going to clear out Fiddler here. And I remove all of these. Then I'm going to come back here to Project. I'm going to open the project, and then we'll go back to Fiddler, and we'll talk about some of the things that we're seeing there. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to File. I'll open up this project here, and now we're going to go back to Fiddler, and you can see that things are getting busy. Okay? And is project completed? Yes, it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what we see here. This is the traffic going back and forth to the server, and here you can see that we start off with just a couple things that aren't very interesting. Then let me move this over so you can see a little bit more. I don't need to see the caching there. Okay, we come here, and the first PSI call that says WinProj read project status. Okay, it looks like it's going to go out and say, okay, are you checked out? You know, what's going on with you? It's also what's happening here is that it's going out and saying, okay, I happen to have the project in the cache, and here is my revision number. So it sends that information to the server, and the server will look at it and say, okay, what version do I have? So do I need to send anything new to the client, or can I just send the response back that says you're good to go, open it up from the cache? So that's kind of what's happening there. Okay, and here we have the read project status again. You can see that the body size is 39,311. Some interesting sizes there. We know that something's happening. Okay, here we have is a pre-read project 2. That's the PSI method. These are not methods that you would normally call from, let's say, PWA. These are specific to WinProj. These are WinProj PSI methods. Okay. Getting some more information about the project there. Starting to read. Okay. Here we go. The post read for project 2 is, okay, that's done. Okay, we're going to check user project permissions. Okay. Come down here, we're going to read some WSS data. Okay. Read project status. Okay. And you can see that that's all it did in order to open up this project. Now, because it didn't really need to go back and get any additional information, I don't see any more PSI calls there. So let me go ahead and I'm going to discard my changes. I'll keep it checked out. And then I'm going to go back here to the options, to the active cache, and I'm going to clear that out. So this time we're going to see some more information. Okay, so we're going to remove this from the cache. Yeah, I know that's true. And here we'll go ahead and clear this out. Then we're going to start that process over again. We'll open up the Can't Open It project. Okay. A little bit more information here this time, or more things that were happening. Okay. Right away, you can see that I have this PSI called Read Project Core Data 2. Okay. Then a little bit later here, I have Read Project Non-Core Data 2. Let me tell you what that is. So project is kind of separated out into what we call the front-end information and the back-end information. The front end are all of your views, tables, filters, all that fluffy stuff on the front end. Okay? It also actually includes things like your baselines. The core data are all of those things that must be read into the project in order to have a schedule. So that would be all your tasks, including their dates and durations and things like that. So in this particular case, you can see that the body, let me expand this just a little bit more. Actually, a little bit more than that. You can see the body on this one here was fairly large compared to the non-core data, which was fairly small. In this particular project, you could see that I only had a few views and stuff like that. I don't have any baselines saved, and so the non-core data is much smaller. Okay? So that's kind of what happens during the normal course of opening up a project. It goes through and it does those PSI calls. Of course, the response comes back with the payload, whatever it needs to have, and then project takes the information and does with it what it will. Okay. Now, going back to our example, the scenario where someone says, I can't open up the project. Remember how I went through the process and I copied that first task where I had the one task and I copied it down to 13. What I did is I increased the size of things considerably. So let me go ahead and I'm going to turn off fiddler tracing here. Actually, let me go back to this machine, which is my laptop, and I'll show you the fiddler trace here. Okay. Now, again, if there wasn't so much latency between here and my office, or if I could have done this directly on the right machine in my office over a TS session, I could have shown you something here a little bit more interesting. So here we go. This is something that I recorded earlier with Fiddler. And the great thing about Fiddler, too, is you can take this information, you can save it, and later on you can replay it if you wanted to. Fiddler also allows you to go in and as the name implies, you can fiddle with the information. So you can basically put in breakpoints and say, okay, well, when I hit this particular place here, I want to stop and I want to change some data. So you wouldn't be changing project data here, but maybe you would change something about the, I don't know, maybe something about the URL or whatever the case may be, something of that nature so that you can start testing with it and see if you're getting closer to understanding your issue. Now, let me just go quickly down here to show you this. Okay, that size right there is basically 72 megabytes. That's fairly large. Remember the other one was like 4 megabytes or something like that. Okay, so what changed here? Well, because I loaded up that project, what I did is I actually just put I put about a 2 megabyte sized PDF file in the object viewer on each of those tasks. Okay, So I just made it very large. I could have done this with just a large project. I could have done it with special baselines. I could have done a lot of different things where one of these PSI calls would have returned a failure. And in this case right here, this is the call that failed. After this, I came down here and I could tell that that right at that point it failed, because I would then get the message in project saying, there was a SOAP failure and so forth. So what was happening here? Well, this was a 32-bit version of project on a 32-bit operating system. So my laptop right here is Windows 7. This is a 32-bit edition. On the other machine you saw me do the demonstration on, that was a 64-bit version. So Windows itself uses the components called MSXML. And when the SOAP request comes in, it knows that it needs to take that whole big payload and it needs to start taking all that XML and making sense of it. And what happened here is it just ran out of memory. It couldn't take that entire payload and work with it. Now on a 64-bit system, I would have hit this same limit probably around 300, 400 megabytes. So there's a bigger size there. But what it told us is that there are conditions where you can put your project into where you might not be able to get the silly thing open even though you had saved it properly. And if it's in your cache, you can still open it, because remember on that first trace I did where it went through and said, okay, here's the pre, and we're going to do a few things here. We're going to check out the WSS data. But after that, I didn't see the read core project data, the read non-core project data, PSI methods. That's because it was reading from the cache. So in this particular case, some users might be able to open up the project, others can't. Now, this is one of those cases where you can't necessarily fix this problem, but you can at least identify it and say, okay, there's something about your project manager. Let's talk about the things you've been doing in that project. Well, I did all of these, blah, blah, blah. Okay. You can then say, okay, it looks to me like we're going to have to avoid doing some of those things until maybe this problem can be resolved. For this particular issue here, I'm going to air some dirty laundry here, but we have not fixed this problem yet. Okay, this is a huge architectural thing where when it was made back in probably 2006 when they were coding for project 2007, or maybe even earlier than that, they said, okay, we'll just have this PSI call. It'll go out, get all the stuff we need. We'll go out, do the second call. We're good to go. Well, they didn't look to see, would there be a size limitation here? Would the operating system have a size limitation? And indeed it does. So what we'd have to do is to basically chunk this and say, okay, we're going to do this in smaller sizes and just keep on doing it until we get all the data. Well, that's an architectural change that we have not been able to do at this point so far. It's certainly something that we're looking to do, and I expect that we will do it, but we haven't done it yet. So this particular case that I worked on, it came as a hot fix. Well, actually the case came to me and I looked at it and it's like, okay, here's the problem. I took it to the team to say, can we get a hot fix on this? They looked at it for a while and they said, ooh, this is not one of those things that we can do right now because it would require tons of work, which would destabilize what we have and could introduce plenty of other regressions, and so it's not something that we can do within a hot fix. Okay, so that's my demonstration of Fiddler. Let me turn back to the demo machine, or the slide machine.
The good thing that also shows, and it relates to Fiddler, but also if you're using other tracing mechanisms, it's always good to run through a trace when things are working, and you can then understand what it should look like, so that when you look at the one that's broken, you can work out where it deviates. I mean, this was a good example because it sort of stopped at a certain point and we got an error, so we really knew that last thing was the broken thing. But sometimes you can run a trace, whether it's SQL Profiler to see what's happening against the database, or Fiddler to see the HTML stuff, and you'll see that, oh, when it worked, it did this, but when it didn't work, it seemed to be missing that part. And that can give you some clues as to where the problem is as well.
Yeah.
And we don't know all this stuff before we start looking at these kind of problems, so quite often we'll get more understanding of how things are working under the hood by using these kind of tools. So, we don't look at something that's broken and know why it's broken. We generally have to look at, well, what should it look like? What does it look like when it's working? And then we sort of work out where it went astray.
Right. That's an excellent point. Sometimes you look at something that is working correctly so that you can then compare it with something that's not working correctly. It's just like having the baselines for your all of your performance counters and stuff like that. If you don't know what the good thing is, then how do you know what's really bad? Okay. So here's a summary. It can help you help you to understand where to look next. And it can also help you to replay calls sometimes. In this particular case, I don't think I would want to replay that fiddler call going back to the server, but theoretically I could if I wanted to. It's a pretty awesome tool. There's a lot of things, and in some ways the UI is a little bit cluttered and stuff like that, but you can tell it's been written by a guy who just is enthused with this stuff and just keeps on adding little features all over the place. Great tool, though. Okay, so the next one is Process Explorer. Let me go ahead and give you the scenario on this one here. Process Explorer, well, I'll tell you what Process Explorer is first. It comes from, you can get it at Microsoft.com, and it tells you what DLLs are loaded on your system, what processes are running, and so forth. When project loads, it doesn't load all by itself. It doesn't just load WinProj.exe. There are tons of other DLLs that it relies on to get services from, whether that be some of the system DLLs to figure out memory management, or some of the Office DLLs so that you have some of that commonality with other Office applications. So there are a lot of things that get loaded together. Now, they don't always play well together. And Process Explorer can at least help us to understand, well, what is loaded together so that we can start saying, okay, well, here are the things that I know that work well. Maybe here's some of the things that I don't see loaded on my system that could be affecting the problem. Okay, so this next scenario here is that I got this crash information. I got this from a customer. He may even be in the room here. I told him I'd try to keep it low-key so that it wouldn't identify him. But anyway, here's the exact information I got from him. So, project was crashing. In this case, I said, okay, when does it crash? Well, it crashes on exit. Okay, well, that's not quite as deadly as maybe crashing right in the middle when you're trying to save something. But, okay, well, how far in the sequence does it crash? Does it look like it's saving your global template and all that? Yeah, it seems to be doing all that. Okay, well, let's try to figure this out. And for a while, it's like, this is a head scratcher. Now, here you can see I've put some information in red. So this is some real computer type stuff right here. This is the type of stuff that when you send those reports to Microsoft, we get this information here, plus we get some other things like some details about what was actually in memory when it crashed. But this is the high level information. I can tell that's version 2007. It's build 6655 5000, which happens to be the December CU. And it says that the faulting module is unknown. Okay? Now, if the crash had actually occurred in WinProj by itself, then the faulting module would have been WinProj.exe as well. Okay? In this case, though, it says, well, there's some other module that's crashing. And it crashed so abruptly that it couldn't even get the information to tell me which module it was. Couldn't get the version information, but lucky for me, it gave me the fault address. So you see the 0x1449603E. Okay, that's the address in memory where the fault occurred. That's where the crash occurred. So it's like, well, how do I figure this out? What is the unknown module, and can I use the fault address to figure that out? Well, if we couldn't, I wouldn't be giving you the demo, but we can, so here we go. Okay, so that's what I forgot to load. I was going to make sure that I had everything loaded here before. So let me go to some tools that I have. Okay, here's Process Explorer. We'll go ahead and load it up. Sysinternals, Microsoft now owns all that stuff, but it was made by a bunch of guys who were just really deep into this, and they made all these wonderful tools that help you to figure out why Windows does what it does. Okay? So this is one of those tools. In here, you can see that it shows me things that are loaded on my laptop. Oh, thank you very much.
Right, sorry, I wasn't doing my job. So all I had to do all day was to sort of make sure the buttons got pressed, and I failed.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks for letting me know that I hadn't switched. Okay, so here is Process Explorer, and this is running on my laptop right here, so you can see all the different things that are loaded. If I come down through this list right here, let's see if I can find WinProj. There's Excel. Did I pass it already? Probably. Did I? Yeah, I can search for it. Oh, I thought I had it loaded right here. No, I don't have it loaded. That's Excel. Thank you very much.
It's an Excel called WinProj, just to confuse
Yeah.
you. Yeah. I didn't do that. I wasn't.
That was me. Okay, so here we go. Let me go ahead and load WinProj. Okay. I should have had that loaded previous to now. Okay, so here we go. Oh, look, it did find something about WinProj here. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, now I do have it loaded. So now I should be able to go down through this list here. Oh, look, it's at the bottom. All right, so let me move this up here. So you can see a little bit more. These are all the things that are loaded with Project right now. Okay, you can see that there are just tons of different DLLs that it gets services from. These are some of the temp files that Project actually creates. I don't even know what this thing is right here. But you can see that they actually load into memory at different places. And so what I did is here is I went into the view, I select columns, and then I went into, let's see, I went to DLL and I selected the base address right here. Okay? So this tells me where in all of the address space of Windows that these different things are being loaded. So I could even sort this based on the base address. And here you can see that it even loads like the fonts into memory. Okay? So you can even figure out where those are loaded. Here's where WinProj is. You can see its base address is 2D110000. Okay. Now, let me show you what I got back from the customer. What I had him do is I had him go ahead and save as here, and this dumped all of this information out to a text file. So I said, what I want to do is try to find something that will match that address. Remember that fault address? Okay. So what I had him do is dump that out, and here, this is what he sent me. Now I've sanitized this a little bit because I don't want to put the blame on a particular vendor for what I found. Okay. Because I really honestly don't know if it's that vendor or if it's Project. It could be either one of us or both of us. Okay? But the point here is that we were able to identify the thing that was causing the crash. Okay? So let's go down through this list. Remember our base address? Okay, here are all those temp files. Remember that address I found, which was 1449, then it had like 6E something, whatever. Okay. So I was able to come down through this base address list right here, and I was able to actually come in here and find out it was some type of script scanner. So this was a virus scanning package, and I've changed this to Security Software Incorporated. And so I was able to identify that, and sure enough, we were able to temporarily disable that, and then crashes went away. Now, that particular customer has told me since that time that, well, it's enabled, but it doesn't seem to be crashing as much anymore. And I said, well, that's very possible. It just really depends on how things get loaded into memory. And we may have done something in a service or into a cumulative update that changed slightly how things get loaded in memory, not on purpose or anything like that, but it just may be enough to not cause it to crash anymore. But at least we were able to identify that what component was leading to the crash. Okay? Now, with this information, would you actually be able to go into that other component or even into project and start debugging and figuring it out? No. You don't have the source code and stuff like that. This is not something that I personally would want to go and debug. I'd go find a developer who owns that area and say, hey, this is exactly where the problem's occurring. Can you go look at it and maybe fix it if you can? But it's not something that I would personally go in and fix. But at least let me identify the problem so that I can then talk to other people about it with some knowledge. Instead of just saying it crashes randomly, I can at least identify exactly the components that are contributing to the crash. Okay. So we've talked about Process Explorer, and it rescued us. So this is kind of the summary that kind of what I've just already talked about here. It can help you to understand the relationships of WinProj to other applications that may be loaded within its process space. For your information, Project has a lot of things that when it loads, it knows I need services from all of these different things. Okay? They could be system things or whatever, or other DLLs that it needs to dynamically link to. But there are also other processes that may inject themselves into the process of Project. In fact, that security script scanner, that was injecting itself into Project. Project didn't ask it to do that. It just said, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to inject myself into all these processes to see if there's any funny business going on with scripts. Well, probably with Project there was no funny business going on with scripts because it just doesn't do that. But it was injected there anyhow. So this Process Explorer can help you to understand the relationships between all of the things on the system and Project. And it can help you to kind of solve that who did it problem or who done it problem.
And sometimes those other applications could be part of Microsoft applications as well, because it might be, we use some of the common file open dialogues and things from the operating system, and occasionally we'll see a problem that we get with one OS that we don't see with other OSs, and it turns out that it's just how we're interacting with those OS components.
Right, right.
So we don't always blame other people.
And in this case here, like I said, I don't know if it was this software, this security scanner thing that was going bad, or if it was Project. It could have been equal fault someplace. But basically, as Project was shutting down, it put a call out that said, hey, everybody that is connected to me, you need to shut down nicely because I'm shutting down. So for whatever reason, this other VS Core script scanner was not shutting down nicely, or Project didn't get the signal back that maybe it did shut down nicely, whatever the case may be. And so a conflict came and the crash occurred. Okay. As I was Okay. As part of my earlier demo, I forgot to demo something. Okay. Remember I said there was a case where, one user can go to the view and they can't see the view, but everybody else can do it. Well, here's kind of a dump of the web user properties table. And here you can see that on the left-hand side I have the res UID. So I could query the resources table to figure out who all of these people are. And if I knew that there was a problem with one user, I could find all the records that are unique to them. Then here, you can see that the prop name, it doesn't come out and say specifically that this is where your problem is, but you can go down through this list, and you might find some things that look somewhat interesting or familiar. So for example, here we can see the divider position. This probably is a GUID that points back to another view, but it tells me where the divider position is for a particular view. Here's the duration of my task, JS grid control. So maybe that is the duration format that I've chosen to display in those views that happen to display durations. Let's see what else. Here's some filter information. Here's some PDP page information. Basically, you could come down through this list and you might be able to find the one thing that you might be able to delete. But again, what did I tell you about deleting stuff? You have to be very careful. In this case right here, you could theoretically delete all of the information for that one user, and then of course they'd come back to all of their pages and they'd be all reset, and that may not be what you want. But I think if you do a little bit of investigation, so for example, if you were to set up a new site and you were to immediately then go to the Gantt chart and then check this table, you would say, okay, what records got added there? Oh, okay. Or maybe you could do a SQL profiler trace or something like that. You could figure out, well, what got added to this table right here? What got changed? Well, that's probably the records I need to be looking at, because those are the ones that are associated with the Project Center view, as the case may be. Okay? So you see how you do that? You just use pieces of information. You look at what works well. You sort of go through the process of watching what happens so that you can then go through the repro scenario that you have for the bad data or whatever the case may be, and then figure out what's happening.
This reminds me of an internal training session we did where we used this exact scenario. So we gave it to our engineers that this resource was getting this problem when they went to this particular view. And so the target, the goal was really to get that user working again. So eventually one of the engineers got this view up and working again for this particular resource, and say, okay, how did you fix it? And expecting that perhaps he deleted every row for a particular resource. Hopefully he sort of worked out exactly which row it was and was very surgical and just deleted that particular row. What they actually did was delete from MSP Web User Properties, which basically blew away everybody's settings. So it fixed that particular person's. This was just in the lab, so it didn't really matter. But in this particular case, even for a customer site, it would be an irritation, but it wouldn't really be losing real data.
Yeah.
So there's the surgical way of doing it, where you just really work out exactly what you need to do and just touch that one piece. And there's the sort of broad brush that you should really avoid. But
right.
It also reminds me of another issue, and again, this sort of fits into the if you really like living on the edge type of scenario. A customer asked, we want to push out to all of our users some specific settings for a view, and we don't have that option. There's no way to say, okay, I want the task duration thing to be weeks for every user, or I want the grid divider to be in an exact place. But potentially, what we've just shown you, you could set that up for yourself, and then you could duplicate those rows for all of the other ResUIDs. So again, it's one of those things where it wouldn't be anywhere written in a KB article that you should go and do this, but if the need's there and if you really need to do it and you test it thoroughly enough, you can use those kind of mechanisms for getting things working as you need to get them working.
Okay. So I'm going to just do a really short, brief thing on the queue here. This is not a demo. This is more of an advertisement, okay? So be careful when you cancel jobs, because you'll lose data. Now, we say you shouldn't just be willy-nilly deleting the queue because, gee, it's just the thing that we've always done because we heard that there are problems. Brian and I did a session on Monday with a number of partners, and we stress to them, it's like, okay, if there are problems because of the queue, we want to fix it. We want to make the queue work well for you. We want to have this thing live for you. And if you're always deleting it, we're never going to find those problems. It's interesting that we had some customers here recently, it's like they always deleted stuff from the queue, but they ran into other problems that were exposed because they deleted stuff from the queue. So just because you think, well, I'll always delete from the queue, I'll be good, you could actually expose other problems that you would not have run into otherwise. I also explained to you that case where the queue can be your friend because it prevents you from having to go back to the server to get stuff that you already have. Why go, in my example here, why go all the way back to Seattle to get the stuff for that project when it's loaded right here on my laptop. Okay? The queue is your friend. So just use this information here. Yeah, there are times when things get broken and we do need to surgically remove a project from the queue or otherwise, but don't make it a matter of habit. Yes?
When you said you can expose problems, did you mean introduce problems or expose problems?
Well, the problem had been there previously, but because they were deleting the queue, it exposed those problems that they hadn't seen previously.
It was deleting the cache.
Yeah, deleting the cache, right, right. So, yeah.
I'm just looking at the URLs and seeing 2007. Does the article supply to 2010?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, there's not too much changed in the sort of queue infrastructure. There's different jobs that run that kind of thing, but a lot of the sort of old blog postings on queue management and cache management are still applicable.
Right. Okay, so here are the tools that you can use. Brian went through the slide yesterday with the IE right click and stuff like that. I also like using the profiler stuff within IE. Application event log is totally useful for me. ULS viewer. If I'm just looking at something really quickly and I know what to look for, I just load the thing up in Notepad and search for it. But these are some of the troubleshooting tools of the trade. Now, so what have we learned? There are times when you can go into the database, but I put here in big red letters, be careful, have a backup, make sure you've tried this a billion times on your sample site or whatever it is that you're doing. Look at something that you know works well, and then compare it with the thing that doesn't work right, and then try to work out the differences between the two. Fiddler can be a great tool for figuring out the traffic that's going back and forth. It may not allow you to fix the problem, but at least allows you to see what's happening and then figure, well, is that a PSI call that I could also maybe call from a tool such as Proj Tool? You know, could I mimic that same behavior that that web page is doing? And can I reproduce the problem there? Maybe it's a problem with the PSI call. You know, nothing to do with the user data or anything like that, but just the call itself, the method. So you can use all these tools in conjunction to help you figure those things out. And then my third bullet point here is just because you figured out where the problem lies doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily be able to fix it, but at least you know where the boundaries are until relief can come from some other method, okay? Whether that be a hot fix or a workaround or whatever the case may be. Process Explorer definitely helps you to solve some of those tricky little problems where you don't have the source code, okay? And then, of course, the queue. Just think of the queue as a broker because that's all it does. It's not actually doing the work. So people say, oh, well, the queue is stuck or the queue is whatever. The queue may be waiting for some job to finish, like maybe save your project, but the queue is not really necessarily stuck. I mean, every once in a while, yeah, the queue does get stuck, but that's usually not the problem. It's the subsequent business object jobs that are called that it has to wait for them to finish so that it can then do the next job that's part of the correlation, for example. Okay. Now I had a list of my favorite tools. Okay. Did I pass over that? One of the slides is missing. That's all right. So, a couple of the tools that I like using a lot. Of course, I use Visual Studio a lot, and of course, since I have the source code and stuff like that, that's very useful to me. You don't have that. So, second on top of that, though, I use the ULS viewers and things of that nature. I'm always using things like Process Explorer. I'm always using tools like the SQL Profiler and those tools like what Brian uses. So, like I said, some of us we have our interest in the product or our specialties, and so I like digging into the code of WinProj and stuff like that. Brian a little less so. So that's where I put my emphasis on it. So anyway, hopefully you've learned some things here and just given you some ideas for techniques that you can use to look at a problem, figure out what are all the details that you need to really dig in and get to the source of the issue. Not that you can necessarily fix it, but that you can at least identify it so that you can talk to somebody maybe at Microsoft or within your organization, find workarounds or whatever the case may be. I've given you absolutely no time for questions, but I'll accept some questions here. Go ahead.
With Fiddler and Process Explorer, those are both client apps, correct? They run
Yes.
on your local machine, not on the server, correct?
You could run Fiddler on the server. The question is, Fiddler and Process Explorer, are they client apps? Well, they have to run within a user interface, okay? But you could actually run it on the server if you wanted to, if you needed to. So let's suppose you had a couple servers, a couple web front ends, and maybe some app tier servers and stuff like that. You could run Fiddler there to watch the communication going back and forth.
If you run it on the client, do you need special permissions for the servers, or can you just run it?
With a lot of these tools, they have kind of a dual mode where it's kind of the you don't need any permission mode, but then there's the also you need the administrative type mode. And so when you start it up, in fact, with Process Explorer, there's a menu option that says run it as administrator, and it'll actually go through that. And of course, if you have administrative privileges, it'll allow you to do that. Question here.
Does the correlation ID relate to anything in the SQL profile?
Does the correlation ID correlate to anything in the SQL profiler?
I mean, generally, it's not going to. I mean, the only time it would do is if in some of the queue management jobs may have that ID in if it's managing that particular thread of jobs. But I mean, quite often when I'm using SQL Profiler, I'll use a trace template that actually excludes certain strings. So anything that's working on the queue, unless I'm troubleshooting a queue problem, I'll try and filter that out, because you don't want sort of half a dozen sprocs every second to sort of cloud the issue of what you're really looking for. So the correlation ID doesn't generally show up. The other thing is, sometimes you get people that, even internally, they'll send us some of the screenshots like Adrian had, where it said, unknown error, here's the correlation ID, give this to your administrator. And they'll just post it up to one of our internal sort of forums and say, I've got this problem, and I'll usually reply and say, so, what did the administrator say when you gave him that ULS ID? And he usually replies and says, I am the administrator, which is